Hello friends! I hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Makara, and I'm going to introduce what we might consider the mission or the victory condition of each of the signs of the zodiac. This is going to be the first full series with a video for each, and there will also be a supercut available with timestamps so you can view the whole thing through. These are based on dividing the needs of humanity into 12 parts, so that if we achieve a state of stability in each area, every single person on the planet should theoretically get their needs met. Because of climate change and degradation of the environment, restoration efforts are automatically a part of each of these and integral to them, but some signs in particular have even more focus on remediation, and we will go into detail on that. I'd like to share with you this snippet from Jared Diamond, which is his response when being asked what is the one problem in all of the world's problems that is the most important, that if we were to solve this one thing, it would have the most impact.
People often ask me, Jared, what's the most important thing that we need to do about the world's environmental problems? And my answer is the most important thing we need to do is to forget about there being any single thing that is the most important thing we need to do. Instead, there are a dozen things, any one of which could do us in, and we've got to get them all right. Because if we solve 11 and we fail to solve the 12th, we're in trouble. For example, if we solve our problems of water and soil and population, but don't solve our problems of toxics, then we are in trouble.
I love that. There's about a dozen things, There's a dozen problems, and we have to get all of them right. That's exactly it. If we were to split up the 12 main needs of humanity into these 12 pieces, this is what they would start to shape up like. And in order to tackle a really big problem, it's important to break it down into manageable pieces and get the best possible people to work on that job in a committee, and then step back and give them the space that they need to apply creative thinking to those problems. And I believe that factions and the committees within them are ultimately going to be how we break down and actually tackle these problems that a lot of people are just throwing up their hands in the air and saying, it's too big, there's nothing we can do about it, and essentially resigning themselves to what? Destruction of the planet, to the end of the human race. I don't really see defeat as an option. So I think if we try to fight back with everything that we've got, and we work hard and smart, all of these things are not only doable, but instead of being this horrible, unfair challenge that was imposed upon us, by some horrible decisions on the part of previous generations, and woe is us, I prefer to view it as the missions by which we define ourselves, and our showing here speaks to something far more greater, to the quality of our spirits and to the resilience of our souls. Every single generation faces incredible challenges. For us, climate change is staring us in the face as the dragon itself, and are we going to face it? Are we going to work together and find a way, or be devoured? But in a very general sense, what we are talking about here is forming committees to manage things like utilities, healthcare, civil engineering, and so forth, things that are generally entrusted to a government to oversee. Because of corruption, mismanagement of resources, failure to address the complexity of human need, and wasteful spending, of course, there are entire categories that have been altogether overlooked, and depending on where you are in the world, one of these may be receiving the lion's share of the funding at the detriment of the others. It is not feasible to expect a government to be able to do this. In reality, they never have. Even the best of systems, it still needs to be informed by scientific and professional organizations. That's not to say we should overthrow the government and promote anarchy, not at all. But I think it will become naturally evident that since we made up these institutions completely out of our imaginations, it will be just as possible to imagine them differently. Less resources will be wasted on the administrative procedures themselves, and instead they will be better utilized on the work itself that needs to be done. A great example of how this works is in something like a nonprofit. There are regulations about transparency and disclosing how much of the donations go towards the thing that they are actually supposed to be doing, be it saving animals or funding research. And if you actually go and look into these, you might be a little bit shocked how much of the funding that they raise is then spent on marketing and trying to get more donations. But because they hold the title of nonprofit, right, which somehow that term has become synonymous with good cause to such a degree that just in my country, the United States, over $1 billion are donated to a charity every single day. Now, personally, I don't see $1 billion of improved quality of living in my country or community. That seems like a pretty astronomical number to be spent on programs which are, for the most part, just picking up the slack where our government is failing to address our needs. In fact, the government often specifically uses the existence of these organizations as grounds to defend their inaction. These people don't need food stamps. They can just go down to the church and get into the food pantry. My favorite JFK quote is, "A rising tide lifts all ships." I love that. There should be no need for a violent interruption, and the best designs are ones that peacefully replace outdated ones by virtue of their inherent usefulness and the value which they provide. So with that in mind, let's examine today the way in which the Conflux system provides the greatest possible value to all of humanity. I will introduce the zodiac signs in terms of their mission. I've touched a little bit on how this benefits the individual by alleviating their decision fatigue. The biggest criticism that I've heard about my work to anyone that I've spoken to about it is that having something predetermined for you at birth somehow infringes upon you and your personal freedom. I think that might be artificially exacerbated by American brainwashing, this need to be independent, unique, self-deterministic, etc. So that's something that we are going to have to pick apart with great care in the future. But the reality is that there are many factors completely outside of our control that limit our options already, be it race, nationality, gender, family structure, economy, ad nauseum. The question is, if it were possible to trade all of those things, those arbitrary things that are thrust upon us at birth, if we were to be able to trade them for something like this, which is actually equitable, would we do it? Could we end racism forever by instead formulating our factionality based on the zodiac signs? Psychologically, from all of my studies, it isn't possible for humans not to discriminate at all, and in fact, it wouldn't be desirable to do so. The ability to draw conclusions quickly from our circumstances and react is a part of what keeps us alive. We just need to train that into discernment rather than impulse via wisdom. But there are many benefits to being part of a team or a tribe, and we need to figure out how to do that in a way that doesn't actually put anyone above one another. And it is my heartfelt belief that this is how we do that. If the distribution is fairly even, out of 7.5 billion people on Earth right now, a little over 500 million are the ones on your team. That means that out of the global 6 degrees of separation we have to every other person on Earth, the factional degrees are actually closer to the speculated genetic ones, which are estimated at 3. You are between 3 and 4 handshakes away from every other member of your zodiacal faction, tops, with cusps making up theoretically up to 10% of the population, it's even less. This metaphor of handshakes is frequently used to demonstrate the interconnectedness of everyone on the planet. I prefer the one used by Alan Watts, which is the concept of Gigi Muge. Everything is connected in this sort of galactic spider web where there's this matrix of threads forming the underpinning and infinite number of tiny little water droplets hang on the thread, and each water droplet is reflecting back all of the others. In my mind, it's not just a spider web, but it's actually a mandala in which all of the petals are joined in the center. And in the center, Om Mani Padme Hum, there's the crystal. And to me, we're not just drops of water, but we're all crystal grains of sand, which are shimmering the whole of the universe back at one another. Well, by all means, meditate with whatever visual resonates with you. The point is that you don't need necessarily to get to some sort of yogi state of interconnected oneness with the whole of the world. That's a big leap for every single individual, and it's hard for the physical body to maintain the full spectrum of flow all the time and be completely tuned in. That's not necessarily the goal. What we want is to reach a state of personal vibration which is high and fulfilling and productive, and tracks and resonates with those 3 degrees. That makes up one tier of the mandala, right? And then each subsequent tier can interweave with those. And if the foundation is strong there, there's no limit to what we can build upon out beyond that. Just like the pyramidal hierarchy of needs, right? With a strong base of physical security, we can ascend higher in the more complex fulfillment of abstract needs, like personal meaning. For each sign, to help illustrate how one might go about contributing to these victory conditions, I will introduce a contemporary person who is influential in these missions, as an example. As a little word of warning, you do have to be kind of careful about the kind of goals that you're setting, because the thing that you're shooting for, while it is really important to go ahead and put in the work and strive and get it, you have to be kind of aware that it might not be the real end goal. And there's this kind of paradox that occurs when you're really successful. Even when you get to the top of whatever hierarchy you're competing in, when you turn around and look back at your progress, it might not really be what you thought. These are just examples. It's not meant to be taken literally as you should go do exactly this, but it's to give you something to look up to, because the people that we're encouraged to view as heroes or successful, basically they're not necessarily who we should be looking up to, because a lot of them get to that place of success and then they just take the money and run, or they self-destruct, and we're not idolizing the real brave people, real trailblazers, the way that we should. A lot of times we are encouraged to idolize the people who have achieved a lot of fame or have a lot of money, and it's not good for us, it's not good for them, and we know a lot about people in especially sports and music who turn out to be very deeply unhappy and are very unfulfilled personally. So even though they got the fame that supposedly everybody wants, at the end of that road, when you turn around and look back on your life, if you haven't forged your own meaning along the way, you end up feeling empty. So that kind of happens regardless of the path that you're on. That's a pretty universal nature of achievement. Kind of something that everybody is going to go through if they strive for greatness and try to find the best possible version of themselves. So we're going to go over some examples of that, which I think are particularly poignant in this current time, and talk about the work that they're doing So if that is your sign and you recognize this person, you can have different examples of what success means and what self-determination is. The focus overall, I do want to keep on this umbrella idea of what a victory condition is, what each faction's purpose is, and talk in a more broad way about all of the ways that you might contribute to and be sharing in the benefit of that collective goal. Through factions, we get the guidance in the structure and all of the benefits that you get from working together as a team, while also having an individual benefit of taking some of the decision fatigue away and being sort of automatically validated in your personal choices because you're able to be more decisive and you can be much more confident in your plan.